G'day students, we have already had a look at what scope means and how it winds into your project management plan. By now you should understand the importance of your scope and what exactly it is, but we've looked at it briefly. For this module, we are actually doing a deep dive into scope management because it is such a major aspect of project management. One needs to understand the scope of a project, how it gets done, why it gets done, before the project can actually move forward. And by now, some of you already know this as you're already working as project managers. Let us have a look first at your glossary. Before anything else, it's so important that you understand your terminology, and so that when we use the terminology in passing, you know exactly what is being spoken about. First thing, we are looking at delivery performance domain. Delivery performance domain. We know what your deliverables are. We dealt with this in module 2, whether it is tangible deliverables in the form of a project that can be felt, touched, seen, or if it is intangible as a service. So we know that bit of this definition. The next thing is performance, and that is the level at which a task is carried out. The next thing is domain, which is a group of related activities or a specific knowledge area. So when we put that together, you want to know that whatever the task is delivered, is given whether as a service or a product at the level, at a high level, within the specific activity it was, or related knowledge area it was asked to be delivered at. I want you to very quickly, on a sidebar, take a look at the way I have done my referencing over here. So all of this was taken from the PMBOK, and I have put PMBOK, 2021, because that is the edition that I used, and I've put it in brackets because I've taken this definition, all the definitions here, and we're looking at from your PMBOK, which, as you know, is loaded onto your portal. And we are going through what is relevant to your scope. So I just want you to know this is how you do your in-text referencing. Right, so delivery performance domain, the performance domain that addresses, so the knowledge area at the expected level that addresses the activities and functions associated. So it addresses what you do and how you do it while delivering the scope of the project. Okay, this is your delivery performance domain. What you do and how well you do it according to what you have been told to do in your scope and project management plan. Plainly, ask yourself, was the project completed according to the scope and quality standards expected? Right. The next is schedule compression. As you know, when you are doing a project, not everything turns out as well as it ought to. Sometimes something runs a little late, there's a delay with your supplier, you've run into a snag, and therefore you need to compress your schedule. This is a method used to shorten the schedule duration without reducing the project scope. So you are shortening the timeline, but you are not taking away from what you ought to do according to the scope. This, when we look at the word compression, it's to reduce the size of an object or objective. Okay, so the actual something tangible, which is your object, or an objective, which is your goal at the end of it. So this may mean that tasks may overlap in order to achieve greater efficiency. That is schedule compression. Now let us look at the most important definition, which is your scope. That is the sum of products, services, and results to be provided as a project manager. See also project scope and product scope in your PMBOK. So sum, that is the grand total. So it's the grand total of everything you need to do, your product as well as your services, your intangible deliverable. That is your scope. Everything that you need to do from start to finish. And this is a major part of project management, is that you have to manage your scope, what needs to be done and when. Your scope baseline is the approved version of a scope statement. work breakdown structure, which we'll be looking at quite a bit going on, and its associated WBS, work breakdown structure. So its associated WBS dictionary that can be changed using formal change control procedures and is used as the basis for comparison to actual results. Let us break this down. Your baseline, as you know from your previous module, is a benchmark. That is a fixed reference by which to measure progress. So we know the scope baseline, so you are now having a look at the scope statement, and you are going, right, according to the scope statement, where are we? What are we supposed to do? Are we meeting the benchmark? This is at minimum where we ought to be and what we ought to do. Are we at that point? That is your scope baseline. Your scope creep, the uncontrolled expansion. So creeping, moving forward, think about this, moving forward slowly. The uncontrolled expansion to produce or project scope without adjustment to time, costs, and resources. So you are expanding the scope beyond its original requirements, but you are not allowed to expand time, cost, and resources. So this tends to bring in a little bit of difficulty if it is so that your time, cost, and resources are exceptionally limited. However, if you find that we can squeeze in a little bit of activity within our set time, cost, and resources, our fixed budget, budget in terms not just of monetary value, but your time and resources as well, then you are able to include duties within your scope, include possible outcomes within your scope without adjusting your resources. Your scope management plan is a component of the project or program management plan that describes how the scope will be defined, developed, monitored, controlled, and validated. I did not include plainly for this because it is very self-explanatory. So I'm still going to take the liberty of explaining this to you because we are having a look at the scope management. So we need to understand what the scope management plan is. It is a critical document. This you must highlight because you will be asked about this in the future. So it is a critical document in project management that outlines how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled throughout the project life cycle. You know by now and understand what the project life cycle is and how you ought to structure it because we did go through it very extensively in your previous module. It serves as a guide for managing all aspects related to the project scope, ensuring that everyone involved understands what is included and what is not. So just like your project management plan, remember earlier in your course I used the example of the store macro being large. We know that macro means big. It's the larger view, and micro being smaller. So when we look at your project management plan, that is a macro plan in comparison to your scope management plan, which is a smaller part of that project management plan. So you've got your project management plan and you've got your scope management plan, which, like I said, is a micro bit of your project management plan. So when we look at all aspects related to that project scope, we are taking your microscope, you are looking inward to say, right, within the scope, can this be achieved? Can it be achieved in the desired time frame? Can it be achieved with the human resources that we have? Can it be achieved with the monetary resources that we have? So when you have a look at your scope management plan, it is important that you take the time to break down before you are able to hand it in for approval. And your key components in your scope management plan include your scope definition. You should know what that is. It describes how the project scope will be defined, including the methods that you will use, the tools that you will use, and whichever other requirements need to be gathered. You also look at your scope statement. And that summarizes the project's deliverables and objectives, so the goals and what you aim to deliver, providing a clear reference for what the project aims to achieve. Then your requirements management plan outlines how the project's requirements will be collected, how it's analyzed. So we spoke about data collection previously. You know that you collect your data, whether it's a survey, whether it's through observation, and you then analyze that data and you prioritize it and you document it. It ensures that all stakeholder needs are considered. That is what your requirements management plan does. And then your work breakdown structure, like I said in the 5 minutes ago, that we are looking at work breakdown structure throughout this module as well. It describes how the WBS will be developed, providing a hierarchical decomposition of project deliverables. We will be looking at this in detail a little later in a bit. So scope verification, you also need to verify the details of what you have now set out to do. So the process for verifying and validating the completed deliverables against the project scope. So is this something that can be done realistically? We've got it here on paper. This is what the scope says ought to be done, but is it something that can actually be done? It defines the acceptance criteria for your project outcomes. Your scope control establishes procedures for managing changes to the project scope, including how the scope results will be evaluated and approved to prevent the scope creep. Like I said earlier, when you have a scope creep, this is a spanner in the works that you do try to avoid. So when extra responsibilities are added to your scope, but without the resources without the expansion of resources. Okay, so this is where we've got a little bit of a problem. And so you want to ensure that with your scope control, you evaluate all change requests to ensure that there isn't a scope creep. And then the roles and responsibilities as well need to be considered above many things. This is a priority. So the purpose is that it defines the roles and responsibilities of team members involved in the scope management to ensure accountability. So although I didn't add your additional I didn't add it to your slideshow, but I did want to just build on this a little bit because this is such a major part of it. So the definition in itself, self-explanatory, but I need you to understand exactly the importance of your scope management plan. Should you wish for me to put this in a document for you, I'm more than happy to do so. You can also find it within your PMBOK. There will be references to your scope management plan as well as in your learner notes. So let us have a look at your work breakdown structure, which I've mentioned. As I mentioned, it is the hierarchical decomposition of a total scope of work to be carried out by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. So if we have a look at the word hierarchical, levels or ranks in order of importance. So that is the hierarchy. What is most important? And then plainly, so if we look at that at the plain definition, it is to break down the scope of work in order of importance. So you're working down the scope of work in order of priority. Okay, so you say, first things first, this is what needs to be done. Second thing, this is what needs to be done. In order of priority, you are ticking off. You then have your performance measurement baseline, the PMB, which we have discussed briefly. That is your integrated scope, schedule, and cost baseline. So remember your baseline, the level you use to compare all other things. So you use this baseline to compare your scope, your schedule, your cost. Where are you and where should you be? And that is just used for comparison to measure, and control project execution. Plainly, it is a combined reference point for all aspects of the project. You then have your planning process group. This is a big one, so it's a mouthful. Your planning process group. Those processes required to establish the scope of the project, refine the objectives, and define the course of action required to attain the objectives that the project was undertaken to achieve. Your objectives, as you know, are your end goals. And then plainly, this is the process used to create the entirety of the scope of the project. That is your planning process group. Just the process, the methods that you use to create the entirety of the scope of the project. You also have your predictive approach. That is a development approach in which the project scope, time, and cost are determined by the early phases of the life cycle. So look at the word predictive, that is to foresee. Say it's to see beyond the current. So plainly, it is to develop the project scope using predictive measures. So this is what we know could happen. This is what we can rely on if we forecast, and using this methodology, we are able to then present a realistic scope. Your management reserve, we have also gone through this briefly previously. That is an amount of the project budget or project schedule held outside of the performance measurement baseline for management control purposes, that is reserved for unforeseen work that is within the project scope. So plainly, it is a reserve fund for snags and other unforeseen tasks. So we've mentioned that you've got your project budget, and then you also have your management reserve. So that also, this is not the same as your project creep, where you can't expand the budget. This management budget is there for little snags, any sort of constraints that come into your project that you need extra cash for, extra reserves for. Then you've got your product scope. These are the features and functions that characterize a product, service, or result. So that's very plain. So the project scope statement, the description of the project scope, major deliverables, as well as exclusions. That's it. That's all it is. What is the project scope? Let's describe it. What are our major deliverables? What is it that the client wants that it is of high importance, high value, and might be of much strain, whether that be in human resources or monetary strain? And what are we excluding in this scope? What do we not need to deal with in this scope? Then your minimum viable product, the MVP, the minimum viable product, a concept used to define the scope of the first release of a solution to customers by identifying the fewest number of features or requirements that would deliver value. In simple terms, this is to deliver the simplest form of your product to the customer without any exclusive or complicated features, to receive feedback for product development continuation. So you're saying, this is my product in its simplest form. This is what I'm trying to put together. Let's see what the customers think about it. And from that point forward, we can continue to develop features of this product. And can be the same with services. This is the simplest service that we are able to commit to deliver. And after we receive feedback, we can then build on our service. Your activity list is a documented tabulation of scheduled activities that shows the activity description, activity identifier, and a sufficiently detailed scope of work description so project team members understand what work is to be performed. So plainly, it's an activity list, which is a detailed list of all the tasks that need to be done in a project. That's it. These are the tasks that need to be done in a project. That is your activity list. Your fixed price contract. Fixed price means unchangeable. If something's fixed, it's not going to change. So it's an agreement that sets the fee that will be paid for a defined scope of work regardless of the cost or effort to deliver it. So the price does not change in spite of variables. Decomposition is a method for dividing and subdividing the project scope and project deliverables into smaller, more manageable parts. Plainly, completing the project in bite-sized pieces. That's all it is. That is taking chunks of the project and going bit by bit. Earned value analysis, the EVA, an analysis method that uses a set of measures associated with scope, schedule, and cost to determine the cost and schedule performance of a project. Plainly, it is a method used to assess how well a project is performing in terms of cost and schedule. That's what you're doing, your earned value analysis. It compares three key factors. So the planned value, what you expected to have completed by now, the earned value, what you have actually completed so far, and the actual cost is how much money you've spent up to this point. So this is a major one, and I would definitely put an asterisk on this, is that you need to know your EVA because you need to be able to evaluate your planned and earned value against your actual cost. That is all for your definitions for today. If you have any questions or queries, please feel free to reach out.